start by introducing our speakers. To my right, we've got Bryant Jones, who is a plant researcher at the University of Minnesota and an herbalist. He's also the membership chair for the American Chemical Society's Cannabis Chemistry Subdivision. Next to him, we have Mike with Meristematic. He is the CEO of Meristematic. They do tissue culture for cannabis. Next to him, we've got LJ from Advanced Nutrients. He's the director of global cultivation as well as the COO of Advanced Labs. And then to the right of him, we've got Daniel Grace, who is the president of Dark Heart Nursery. And then to the right of him, we've got Dr. Stephen Newmaster, who is with the Cannabis Barcode Project. He's also a professor of botany and genomics at the University of Guelph. And so with that, I guess we'll dive into our first set of questions here. So there's a lot of hype around, genetics in general and, what it can bring to the cannabis industry and basically really creating better medicine for everybody. So I guess let's start with the term strain. What is in the term strain, and can we get some perspectives on the use of that term?
I can speak on that. So as a horticultural scientist, the term strain is thrown around a lot, especially when somebody just has just a bag of something that they bought from somewhere and it was called something. It will say, "This is my strain." It's a term that's a misnomer that only refers to the bringing together and hybridizing of two land races. From these land races, then you produce a true breeding progeny. Within all of that is described as a genotype, or we call them chemovars now. And that should be the term that's used for any indescript bag or jar of cannabis, because I guarantee it's not a true breeding land race.
So I'm a taxonomist, phylogenist. So I spend my life classifying and naming new species. And there's this whole hierarchy, kingdom, division, class, order, family, genus, species, and we teach this in universities. We write about it. We try to classify things and put them into buckets. And the species concept is a difficult thing to wrestle with. We have scientific terms, and strain is not one of them. It's not defined. Yet your whole industry is running on strains, and we can't characterize it because it's not definable. It's not a scientific term. And so the things that we just heard about that you're talking about, it's great. Land races are, they're definable. Varieties are. There's breeding rights around varieties and land races, so you can protect IP. You can't do that with a strain.
Well, here in California, we have varietal patents.
Correct. That's a variety, not a strain.
Well, in terms of synonymous, one
No.
term used in cannabis space. When we talk about having a wedding cake or fire OG or purple kush, those are what we call as strains, but those are all unique varietals.
No, I respectfully disagree. You cannot characterize a strain. So I would say, so I'm a scientist, and you have to measure it. And metrology, that's the study of measuring things. How do you measure a strain? There's no guidance documents. There's no AOAC guidance document. There are no publications about what characterizes a strain. There are for varieties, and one of the key characteristics that was shared is it breeds true. F1, F2 populations, it breeds true. And strains don't do that. They're clones. Or there's no evidence or even a path.
Certainly not the case in California. We have established patent programs around ornamental unique varietals that are not true breeding.
Yep.
Protectable programs, if you want to.
They are, but they're classified as varieties. Variety has a strict definition. Strain does not. So what we need to do, so I think we're just talking about different terminology. What we need to do is slowly move the industry into classifying, characterizing what they have into varietal, horticultural type terminology.
Ironically, this isn't the only industry that we see somewhat of a scientific separation from the artisan separation. We actually have the same terminology issue in fine wines with clones. You'll have a Cabernet clone number 6. Now that's how it's referred to in the industry, and I think that's what Dan is talking to, is that the artisan cultivator is more used to referring to these varietals, or cultivars is the term I like to use, as strains. And like I was saying, in other artisan approaches like fine wine making, we also see this separation. Those grapes by a lot of the cultivators aren't referred to by their genotype specificity, but simply by their industry label as clone number 6 Cabernet.
Yeah, I'm just saying that we're more so at the point in time now where cannabis is in the mainstream enough to where those terms that have been grandfathered in, you know, as misnomers, it's time for us to educate, you know, consumers on proper terminology so that they're not, you know, sounding, I don't want to say stupid, but you know.
It might be important for academics to get the terminology right, but I can tell you consumers don't care. And the consumers are going to continue calling them strains, and why should they care? I mean, consumers shouldn't really even know what varietals they're consuming, right? Like, if you ask me.
That's one of our objectives up here is to educate, make things the right way. I mean, there shouldn't be a line between somebody who's an academic and somebody who's a consumer, because that's how you breed those two different, you know, just realms of people. You know, where one thinks one's is better, or one may think they're better than the next because they know what they're saying, or the other one will say, well, I know this from a lot of anecdotal evidence that this is what it's going to be called.
Do they?
I respectfully disagree with that. I think that it is important that we recognize and establish distinctions between academia and consumers. I don't think it's relevant for us, but I think we need to be intentional in thinking about what is important to consumers and how that's different than what's important to scientists.
The industry is just like coming out of the dark and into the light. Like science just started coming in real hard in 2012 in Denver, where guys really started studying because they didn't have to risk their entire livelihood to do it. So it's like, you have 30 years of this term, you know, and like fine. And academics always speak differently than the rest of us type of thing, you know what I mean? It's like as far as scientists, like true science, there's names for everything.
The only reason I'm bringing that up is because bringing cannabis into the mainstream has been a product of academics presenting this plant in a way that somebody who is not privy to this plant can understand, because, oh, these aren't just a bunch of stoners anymore. They know what they're talking about. So let's kind of move away from all that and kind of, you know, stay on the trend of being ahead of the curve.
I disagree in that the people who brought in the live reviews were doing this for the last 4 years, like risking their ass, you know, so like that's what I got to do.
There was not an academic at a conference like this 5
Right,
years ago.
right?
Yeah.
Bunch of potheads.
I think the industry, the people, the culture that existed previously is what normalized this plant for society. You know,
It took
I think
academics to write those laws to get this.
Absolutely.
No, it took industry. I helped write those laws. No, industry wrote those laws. Academics would not have.
But we weren't using slang terms, you know what I mean? I'm just saying, the terminology that's conveyed in said laws weren't necessarily colloquial.
If I asked a scientist to describe a Red Bull, he's going to say it a lot different than your consumers want a Red Bull. You know, they don't want like, it's like polyphate, and just, you know, they don't give a shit, it's meaningless.
It is important to have consistent terminology for breeders, for the cultivators, but I think what we're really seeing here is basically where science and breeders kind of meet the cannabis market and the branding, which has been so tied to the presentation of this product for so many years.
I'm not trying to suggest that there's like a distinction or a rift between science and industry or consumers, but rather that we need to be intentional, you know, about the way that front of house is different than back of house, so to speak, is the way that I think of it, right?
Sure.
Back of house is science, we're talking amongst each other, and we should have a shared language amongst that. I agree with that, but that is very likely and should be distinct from how we're speaking front of house and how we're presenting that value and that work that we've done back of house to the consumer.
I can give you that.
Did you know we've had 25 PhDs for like 12 years and won 3 unlimited pot licenses in the world? So we're like advanced, I mean, we're like huge in the science of the pot on that side. And like, I appreciate that, I respect it, it's helped us conquer the fertilizer world in that way. But the, I don't know, just, I mean, are we really talking like consumer? Like, I think they want a bag of OG, period. You know, shit where it came from, what the parent is, or like, does it get them high or not? I don't know, that's what I see in the market.
But it's funny you mention that because the consumers do identify so much with what we call strains or, you know, varietals.
They like what they like.
And that's actually unique with cannabis, and it's kind of an interesting question. Like, to what extent will that carry over?
I mean, there's more we don't know about this plant than what we do, just at the beginning. You know, we're still identifying cannabinoids, and we haven't gotten into flavonoids, esters, lipids. I mean, there's so much that we're just like banging
Yeah,
rocks
and
in
you
the
know
fire.
what? That's where we can come together and really help. So we in our lab we study a lot of ethnobotany, and we go to cultures that have been isolated for a very long time, and they have this traditional knowledge, and they classify at a very fine level, which is much like the artisan work that you're working in cannabis. You figure out how to grow things to get a certain chemotype and phenotype that people really love, and they love to use it. And we see these with these cultures.
I'm sorry, I dropped my times.
The cool thing is we can measure those chemicals, we can measure those flavonoids, we do NMR, and we have these great ordinations. I'll be talking about it tomorrow. And that becomes a model that you can use. And it classifies all these things that you see. And it defines genetics.
It defines the high.
For it. But the chemotype is there. And classification scientists can classify all these things and go, this is beautiful. You basically use this. You can call it whatever you want. But if we take it and put it into the context of what the terminology that they're used to using, you could also dissect it. So that's the industry move forward. So I don't want to take up too much time. I want to give you one key example that happened actually last Monday. So we were meeting with a big retailer that everybody in the room would know, and they want to move to edibles. And I got invited in as a scientific advisor, and we're going, okay, we've got a problem. We want to be able to work with the cannabis industry. We want to bring in these cannabis ingredients, and we have a QA/QC program. We have to have a measurable test to make sure we have a consistent product and it's safe. So the safe thing's easy. You just test to make sure it doesn't have foodborne pathogens, blah, 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 no heavy metals, no pesticides, like that's easy. But the what question was really hard for them to wrestle with, and it was an impediment. They wouldn't move forward with this unless they could measure what. So I gave them these models that said, you know what, I can classify all these strains based on the chemistry, and you can use that as a quality control metric. And now you know as it goes through, it's consistent quality control. And they bought into it, and everything moved ahead. So we can give you those tools. That's where if we work together, we can celebrate all the great breeding and the work that you do and what people love. And I go back to that original experience that happens ethnobotany. That is humans who've done for 5,000 years in these cultures. Experiential, and it's a chemotype, and it's not always a genotype. You can't always go for it. But the chemotype's there. You know what? We can measure it now. Give you those tools.
I'm excited as shit that the doctors are in. Like, that's great for everyone. The medication coming out of it is incredible. People are, like, getting healed. The, GW, CBD thing, that's incredible for children. I'm stoked on all of that. I'm just saying, like, there's going to be a little bit of this as we all get to know it. Farmers, you have, like, pot outlaw farmers, and then a bunch of doctors in the room. It's like, yeah, there's going to be a little getting to know each other.
The successful groups,
Work it out,
the successful groups, though, will bridge those communities and understand what both can really bring to the industry, and be able to understand high-level breeding science and those terms, and then also understand the consumer on the street and what they're looking for.
Can I say something about the doctorships? I'm dealing with them a lot, and I'm telling him this. I need more doctors who tell me how I can't than how I can. And it's hard for me to find a doctor who, like, I mean, we were talking about CBN creation, and I was like, you're telling me it's artificially oxidized THC? Yeah, dude, that might work. And it's like, why the fuck am I the pothead coming up with this? You're the doctor. Like,
So, kind of want to circle back to genetics in general. So, a lot of people have been breeding these varieties for a very long time. Of course, this was all underground in the past, but now as we move things into the mainstream, now a lot of people's work is being compromised because people are going and patenting up a lot of these varieties that are being created. So, I'd like to hear from the panelists as far as how they're going about protecting some of the work that they've done.
Don't send it to Philo.
Zing.
I think having been a breeder in the kind of pre-industry state, and then working with people coming from high-level biotechnology and managing high-level breeding programs, I've learned a lot about the documentation process. And a lot of breeders, they may actually have two really great hybrids. They may have been successful in producing a unicorn that's worthy and relatively stable, but they didn't document what they did. So if they were ever challenged in court, they're going to have nothing to present. I think when you look at, let's say, like even the bad guys, the Monsantos of the world and those major ag companies, they've got years of documented science around what they're producing and the genotypes that they're bringing to market. My advice to cannabis cultivators is to document every step of your breeding process and take thorough notes and photos in order to give you content to support a claim in court should you eventually find yourself in that position.
I think, Daniel, you might still be, say, want to pass that? Okay.
Jack? So I'm actually like pretty interested in this topic of IP around varietals because it's really a core part of our business model, especially, we do some breeding work ourselves, but we also work with a network of breeders from all over the state, offer their genetics. And of course, everyone's concerned with, what is the model look like so we can make sure that these breeders who've done great work for decades are getting paid. And I can say, like, right now, it's so immature, and people need a lot of help understanding intellectual property protection in the space. Most of the way that this is being protected right now is by keeping it secret, right? It's like a trade secret, basically.
Exactly.
Contracted, exclusive contracted production. People are trying to use, but again, there's a huge trust element there that's really, really immature. And of course, I think there's two key elements to think about. One is like defensive intellectual property protection. So you've got a lot of work already out there, and the breeders are especially concerned with this. There's a lot of work already out there, and they want to make sure someone else doesn't come in and get paid for the work that they've done, right?
How much it costs to enforce a patent? It's like $1 million every span.
That's
It's
right.
hard
That's
as
right.
shit.
And so you're seeing,
more important
these
than filing
in
is
some
keeping it
cases
hard.
overly broad, process patents and stuff like that that are being issued or at least applied for, and that's a big concern. And people are, we're all going to have to step up. I mean, it's not going to benefit the industry, the development of the industry at all, for these overly broad patents to be issued. So we all need to be paying attention to that and probably pushing back on some of these to demonstrate prior art. The other element, and the place that I think especially some of the heritage breeders that have been around for a long time need some help with is actually going out and proactively protecting their work. We try to help with some of that, in terms of pointing them in the right direction. How can you use it proper, whether it's process or most of it would be like a plant varietal here in California at least, patent type application. Or even just an initial registration or filing so they can get some provisional protection for those varietals. And especially educating them about getting that done before they release these varietals to market. That's a big change in, especially, I don't know how it is elsewhere, but especially here in California in the cannabis industry, it's a huge change because the way that breeding has been done so far in cannabis has been very much on this rapid development, almost like, like a tech term would be like agile, right? It's been like this agile, rapid development release cycle. Because the intellectual property has not been protectable, the model has been time to market, right? So how fast can we get a new varietal to market? How fast can we get it popular? And then how quickly can we rinse and repeat and get another varietal to market, right? But by the next trade show, I want to have a new release so that I can have a line down the block, selling seeds for $50 a pop or something like that.
And I'm sure that one's real stable.
And so, it's pollen checking. I mean, that's the model. That's the model. And look, it's worked, and we've created some great varietals that way. But it's not. That's not how. What breeding programs are going to. There'll be some place for that, but that's not what most breeding programs will look like moving forward. It's certainly not the most valuable programs. But again, like a lot of the market is still, even the consumer market is oriented towards that, right? Because that pushes down the supply chain. You've got retailers then that are also saying, well, your 3-4 year breeding project for stabilized seed is like interesting and all, but like what hype strain are you going to be able to offer my consumers next month, right? So that's where we have to kind of bridge the gap a little bit. On the one hand, we got to work with the breeders to say, like, what, maybe don't release that strain like 1 month after you did it. Like maybe hold on to wait until you have it like filing or something at least, right? And on the other hand, like with these breeding programs, it's like, hey, look, it's nice to like, I talk to people that are like melon breeders, right? Syngenta melon breeders, right? So what's your release cycle? They're like, well, like 8-9 years, right? Because we want to release in 8-9 years. That'd be like a home run for us, right? It's like, you can't run a breeding program in cannabis with a 9-year release cycle. It's just not, you'll never make it, right? So that's where we gotta kind of come together here, some middle ground.
Great.
I can speak a little bit to how the court system works, because we do, it's actually on right here. So we work quite a bit with the court of scientific advisors, and a good example is Canada. So Canada, recently legalized. We're at the University of Guelph. We're working with Health Canada to set up a registry. We've been working on that now for 5 years. We have 172 licensed producers. We call them LPs. They have anywhere from 20 strains to 300 or 400 strains in their coffers that they want to protect. They've kept them just as company ID, and some of them have tried to register patents, and they've gone through the first patent stages. And there's a lot of kind of turf wars going on. So we were brought in to measure genomes, and we're publishing that. We published that first genome of science and the whole genome of Canada. So that's kind of your reference genome. Convention on Biodiversity says you cannot patent living biodiversity. And once you produce a whole genome and you publish this, and that's now public, that this is the biodiversity of Kansas, this is the Kansas and Utah. You, if you're a breeder, you have to show that you create something new. That's how the patent process works. You want a patent. And there are breeding mechanisms that we just heard about how to do that. And the cannabis industry is doing this as well. Some of those are real. So in our database right now, we have 14,000 strains. And when we look at it, we measure it, over half of those, which is actually pretty amazing, are real, and the other half actually are just part of the natural genome of the first 16 can't have it. Those, half of those, are owned by a whole pile of different companies, and nobody has brought them and put forth a patent. So when they do that, you get into these battles, and then you get brought into court. So the system is really messy right now. We need another way to recognize, particularly the chemotypes. And so one of the suggestions we put forward is that let's measure the chemotype, and it allows that when you do a breeding system, especially with bite, within some of your growth facilities, you create something new, and something that the consumers want, and that's really cool, and you can protect that. And that's the patent process. There's 2 steps. So you're growing it, you're cloning it, you're exposing it to a certain process of light and temperature and moisture, whatever it is that creates your brand. That's a patent process. It's another path to protect it, and I think that would be useful for the industry.
Most of what we're talking about, I think, is good. I'm more concerned about, like, okay, I was walking in this big ass grow in Colorado, and this guy's like, check out my 40 light breeding project, and it's like, one didn't get away from me, right? You needed 40 lights of an unproven seed. Solid, smart move. No, and these guys are like, they're fucking pollen chucking, and it's just terrible, man. It's like the strains come out, they're totally unstable. They ruin farms all the way down the line, like the backlash from it, how many people bleed on its behalf is just so uncool. Like, there used to be like really artisan dudes who would like do one branch at a time, and like really watch it, really, yeah, totally, I know. But I mean, I'm seeing a lot of straight up pollen grenade into a big room and bunch of seeds, and let's just flood the market, hammer 10 billion farmers underneath us, and like there's some ugly pool out there.
Yeah.
Left and right.
It's funny. I think like it's just like truth in advertising, right? Like if that's what you're selling, then let people know.
Test it out. I don't want to beta test your stuff, you know what I mean?
Exactly. I mean, like, if you think you're buying that and you're getting something that's been stabilized, that's where the problem lies. I mean, that type of like broad, very heterozygous type of like population, like there's a place for it. Like especially in ornamental breeding, that's exactly what you look for. Like, let's create cast the broadest net we can and find it.
Like good feminized seeds, you barely get a hernia. Terrible ones, it's like 2 in 10. Like just everything's pollinated, crop ruined. It's just, that's part that I dislike about the Wild West breeding thing they're doing.
Well, and hopefully we can, on some of that, we can let the market choose, right? Like, people who can develop a reputation for not doing that.
I like the farmers, man. The end product will find its way there, but the farmers get hammered upon genetic or untested genetics, and that's where it's just a bummer. I mean, a lot of these guys are simple dudes trying to feed their families. Like, I can get behind that. Like Humboldt, that whole community closed down because of the pot grows.
So for me, cannabis breeding is finally actually really beginning to happen in a truly scientific way versus the anecdotal taste, flavor, smell, visual characteristics. Now, what other larger companies do, which the cannabis industry hasn't really considered yet, is shifting away from trying to secure specific genotypes and patent and protect those, but will shift at some point to focus on traits, and we will pursue patenting of traits. That's what we see with a lot of the other large commercial ag companies. Those traits could be passed along into multiple genotypes and chemotypes to benefit. No, not in particular. Really what I'm talking about are molecular assisted breeding programs, specifically polyploids, specifically, all have the potential to revolutionize the industry as we know it today.
I mean, CRISPR's a vehicle for that, enzymatic reactions can be a vehicle for that. I mean, there's a few different ways of affecting the inheritance of the plant.
I would say, like, I think we're actually talking about two different things here. I mean,
Sorry, yeah,
there's molecular genomics, and then there's like programs intended to develop specific traits, right?
Mhm.
Process patents around those traits. Personally, I think the latter is more important than the former. In other words, I think that breeding programs intended to develop traits are most important, and where appropriate, and it's not always appropriate, but where appropriate, we can use some of these molecular genomic tools to assist those programs. But I think the most important thing is that we set up these breeding programs intelligently. What I see as the biggest impediment to that is not the technical tools, especially like the genomic tools. What I see as the biggest impediment to that is regulatory, frankly. What we need for well-run breeding programs, more than anything, is scale. We need to look at a lot of plants. We need to evaluate a lot of plants. We need to evaluate them in many different contexts so that we understand how the genes are reacting and how the varietals will adapt to their local environments. And that's just too hard to do, basically, in every market that I've looked at.
Bro, I don't think you can go one way. I think you need genomic, analytic, and breeding, like all in the same place. You can check her on every step.
There's no reason why every university in the country should not have a major cannabis breeding program. It's easily justifiable. I'm studying at the University of Minnesota Cannabis Sativa. I'm one of two scientists that are working on this. The other one is a genomist and analytical scientist.
Yeah.
And I'm a horticultural scientist. So nobody else is studying this horticulturally.
Hey,
but
wait.
yet we have university.
Academically.
Academically, there should be a perpetual breeding. I mean, we're breeding chrysanthemums and have been breeding them for 75 years perpetually at the University of Minnesota. Chrysanthemums.
And this could realistically drive revenues for university research projects too. It could bring money into these departments, because I know as someone in the cannabis space, I've had to engage universities to license technologies. I'm familiar with those processes. And like I was saying, this could help smaller universities to find a really creative and interesting niche and get revenues to continue the development.
That's what I'm trying to do. If you bring in a certain amount of money within a certain amount of time, the powers that be will recognize, oh, we maybe need to look into this a little bit further. I've got a student who brought in X amount of money, and I think we should give him a whole side of the greenhouse. Chrysanthemums.
I feel like I don't know you anymore.
Yeah. You can see how many chrysanthemum tissue cultures I've done. It's like, but there's a demand for them. It has been for 75 years, sitting up to where the university would justify a whole breeding program just perpetually. It's a perpetual breeding program. That's the word that's actually put in front of it. Perpetual breeding program. Meaning this is an indefinite thing. They don't plan on slowing it down. It's insane the amount of varieties that we've developed of chrysanthemums at the University of Minnesota. And we should be using it for cannabis because it's way more prevalent. It's way more. There's more people spending money. I mean, you have so much money being shuttered in this country on a daily basis in the name of cannabis, not in the name of chrysanthemums. So,
I mean, medicinal genomics doing some amazing work.
yeah.
There's a lot of guys doing amazing work in this direction. I mean,
Yeah, no, 100% we need more. And I think, and again, like, what we need is scale. We need more, not only like more places doing it, but we need large-scale trial sites. We need,
Peer
at the
review.
end of the day, we need to review a lot of genetic combinations. And unless we have the capacity across the industry to do that, which is right now, I would say, you need to be 2 orders of magnitude more than what we have right now.
Dude, we're just getting
Yeah,
started.
we're
The
great.
doctors have just entered the game type of thing. And like, dude, when you guys found pyrethrin inside some of the genome,
Yeah,
like this
pyrethrin,
plant
yeah.
could self-defend it. That
Yeah.
It's like, wow, automatic pesticide or natural releasing in the
Except for-
environment. How do we do that?
It won't pass regulatory
Well,
guidelines.
yeah, okay.
That's the problem.
Whatever.
Just straight up.